I swear 2021 was a year that got a ton of long-awaited sequels. It was filled with so many fun surprises that I honestly didn't know what to do with it. So I ended up playing a bunch of old puzzle games and acquiring a gambling addiction. Honestly, it's years like this that I wonder if going through my immense backlog is worth it. Seriously, how did I miss No More Heroes 3, Pokemon Snap, Ratchet & Clank, and the Mass Effect trilogy? Wait, what was that last one? Instead, I spent the majority of my time looking at math to make art so I could make a little robot smile at me. Legitimately, I don't know how my mind works when it comes to picking games sometimes. Ooh, of course. Castle of Shikigami 3. Perfect. Still, the games I played this year had some pretty good ones, even if I did end up finishing Pokemon Quest. So, without further, Dragon Quest Hero, The World Tree's Woe, and The Blight Below, here are my top 10 games I played and beaten for 2021. Number 10. Final Fantasy IX. Final Fantasy IX has always been a game that has been widely regarded in the Final Fantasy community as one of the best, and thankfully it holds up in that exact expectation. Not only is it the best of the PS1 trio, but it's above and beyond one of the best of the series. While I certainly wouldn't call Final Fantasy IX a hard game, it is a game that lends itself well to building your characters how you want without losing the uniqueness of each character. While the story does lose a bit of focus, it stays grounded in what it wants to set up and do. Plus, the way the game constantly switches the cast points of view is so well done that I just can't express how much I want more of that in other Final Fantasy games. Not only is the party treated as more of an ensemble, but it's also something that they constantly focus on and give themes to. Not all the themes are done well, sadly, and out of all the good games you could remake, Final Fantasy IX would probably stand to benefit the most out of it. Most of the problems really just rely on the second half of the game going into a bunch of odd stuff, and honestly it just doesn't work well compared to the first half. I feel like a lot of Final Fantasy IX's problems are just not having enough time to focus on themes as much, and some characters coming in far later in the game that just don't really have the screen time that they need. I don't want these criticisms to seem too harsh, of course. In a lot of ways, the fact that the game just goes to the end may be seen as a pay saver, or at least not dragging the game too much. Still, if there could be some nice mix of cutting down certain fat and adding more story quests, or just expanding the story to the post-game, I feel Final Fantasy IX could immensely benefit. Considering the problem though, Final Fantasy IX not having enough for a player to chew on already kind of speaks levels in which its story and characters engage you. I wouldn't call Final Fantasy IX the best Final Fantasy game out there, but it certainly takes a lot from what other Final Fantasies are good, retools them, and uses them more or even make new ones to really hit home the quality of this game. If you wanted to start out playing a Final Fantasy in the series, I'd honestly suggest 9 as a good starting point. Simple, easy, and really engaging. Number 9. Kingdom Hearts Dream Drop Distance HD. I've never been a big fan of the Kingdom Hearts combat. It's honestly always felt to me deflated and brain dead despite knowing that there is a certain nuance to it. And while I did enjoy Birth by Sleep's edition of it, going into more over-the-top modes and building on Kingdom Hearts 2 drives, I felt there was something lacking there. Surprisingly, it turns out that simply speeding up combat a bit with wall bounces and flashy movements with the environment is exactly what I wanted. The fact that Dream Drop Distance fixed this issue and actually added a layer of exploitation with the balloon system simply just takes the cake and makes it my favorite version of Kingdom Hearts combat. Seriously, Dream Drop Distance combat rocks socks because of how hard it goes on Flash and Flare. Being able to go zip-zap all over the place and use a bunch of hard-hitting spells makes combat more of a fun spectacle each time, rather than a simple mash of the X button. And on top of that, movement overall is improved by wall bouncing and mid-air dashing. A fun little fact that air dashing improves the majority of games by simple inclusion. So not only is the combat faster, but wait time and exploring are too. The fact the majority of the moves are also unlocked at the very beginning also helps improve players' times overall. Sadly, I can't say they improved any of the story beats though, as once again, Kingdom Hearts is a complex mess of logic and reason that simply would be better off being ignored. Toward the end of Dream Drop Distance, the story gets really weird and dives into time travel and dreams that it simply has no right to actually hold any merit. Thankfully, most of the story is more akin to self-improvement and gives the world Sora and Riku visit a bit more meaning compared to the previous games. Although changing a 1 to a 2 in meaning isn't really that big compared to being 100% worth it. Aside from that, everything is pretty much the same kind of Kingdom Hearts you may know aesthetically. Worlds are bright, people say darkness a lot, and Sora is a dumb gay. While I don't think this game is needed at all to understand the lore series, at the least, you will have a good time with the combat. That's what I feel is worth playing this game for. Number 8. Fire and Ice. You don't always know what to expect when it comes to subscription games. Sometimes you get a classic, sometimes a hidden gem, and sometimes you get some really big stickers. Thankfully, Fire and Ice is a hidden gem through and through. While I can't speak too much about the first game in the series, Solomon's Key, Fire and Ice opens up with a fun little fairy tale bit and puts on an NES charm pretty hard throughout. Honestly, the polish of this game is immediately seen with the way it has cutscenes, a bright world map, and a wonderful soundtrack. Often we forget as time moves on that these weren't always things that were standard in the game industry. We really did work with some bare bones graphics, huh? Still, Fire and Ice help set the standard that we know of today, as well as provide for a really great puzzle game. And oh boy, this game puzzles! Seriously, out of all the puzzle games I played this year, Fire and Ice was by far the most clever, challenging, and unique puzzles for any given player. While not each puzzle itself is hard in terms of the goal, defeat all enemies, it is another when rooms just kinda look like this. And you can only do actions diagonally.
Pretty sneaky, sis.
It honestly amazes me that Fire and Ice got so much of this little dynamic, while also making each world of puzzles feel new and fresh, with how it introduced a new element to play with as you go along. It's that kind of addictive gameplay loop that helped me really get into this game. And while I don't think there is much in terms of secrets in this game like there was with Solomon's Key, Fire and Ice in itself is kind of a secret gem in the NES library. Number 7. Great Ace Attorney Adventures. As individual cases, Great Ace Attorney Adventures doesn't really top any of the better cases from each game. But what it does do is give us a solid, consistent experience throughout. From start to finish, each case is important to the story, the mechanics of the game, and character growth. Each case not only builds on one another, but are also connected in some way or fashion, and in that respect, this makes Great Ace Attorney Adventures one of the best in the series. Naruto, though, is a charming individual from start to finish, and while he looks rather plain compared to the rest of the cast, the animation and dialogue make him stand out just as much as the people he interacts with. Kazuma is a wonderful mentor figure and loyal friend to Naruto. Susato is a wonderful woman and sidekick that really proves to be far more enjoyable due to a lot of her quirks and willpower to overcome her interactions with others. Iris, while not interacted with as much, is still a sweet child and enjoyed to be around while she is on screen. And of course, Herlock Sholmes rounds out the rest of the class by being a big blowhard with motives that seem perplexing yet helpful. Along the way, additional cast and world building established throughout various interactions helps not only match the original game's cast of characters, but are stronger for them. Topping everything off, Great Ace Attorney Adventures benefits from the 3DS and Switch hardware by providing quality animation throughout while also using various angles and movement that would simply be too hard to deal with sprites. Overall, great Ace Attorney Adventures proves that 3D modeling of these characters helps bring them more to life, and really does help the game stand out as one of the base Ace Attorney adventures out there, and one that could absolutely be played without any knowledge of the previous games. Number 6. Batman, the Telltale series, The Enemy Within. To say Telltale got around when it came to licenses is an understatement. One of the biggest reasons the company failed was due to it always taking on too many projects, and for a long time, I thought it was because Telltale didn't actually care about making a good choice system, or care about the material at hand. But on revisit, I found time and time again the opposite is indeed true. Telltale crafts a lot of these stories well and try to help set up their own versions of characters, plots, and world building. The Enemy Within is a great example of Telltale creating something new from old. Relationship dynamics are always the most interesting part of Telltale games, as the iconic "Blink will remember that" is often a trope found in a lot of them. So of course the iconic duo of Joker and Batman would have a larger focus on their relationship dynamic compared to everyone else in the series. While Joker, aka John Doe, played a minimal role in the last season, he is brought in heavily for the second season. Perhaps what is the most compelling thing about John Doe and Batman is more so how their relationship dynamic just can change so drastically depending on your actions as both Bruce or Batman, making the origins of Joker itself far more multiple choice and possibly far more connected to Batman than before, or simply showcasing such a lost cause. While the relationship with Joker and Batman has always been a prominent dynamic in the series, it was never something that was established with Bruce Batman having all the power. John Doe was honestly just a really mentally unstable patient that is looking for support, and in this way, Telltale actually makes us empathize with him. Not to say that there isn't other relationships or characters in the story that aren't interesting, as I do enjoy these versions of the Riddler and Harley compared to how we usually get them. But still, every relationship takes a backseat to John Doe and Bruce, and really that's what makes the season far more interesting than the last. While I don't think we will find a continuation of this version's Batman anytime soon, I honestly enjoy my time with both games and consider them an overall positive experience. Any problems I had with the season were often minimal in comparison to the majority of the Telltale's work. And while I do think it was both enhanced and suffered from the focus on one relationship, I don't think I would treat that unique approach with the usual same old same old. It's both a testament to Telltale's writing skills and the staying power of these DC characters. Number 5. Nurse Love Addiction. After coming off the highs of Yuri Love from its remake sister game, Nurse Love Syndrome, I was honestly surprised by Addiction's common route. While the majority of Nurse Love Syndrome was about the main protag learning about all the ropes of becoming a nurse and giving plenty of information on medcare and the like, Addiction has next to nothing of that. In fact, most of Addiction's common route is more akin to school social dynamics and learning about the main character's past. While Kaede's route doesn't bother with learning about the past, the other three main routes are very interconnected with each other, as Sayaka, Itsuki, and Nao all interact within each other's routes, and you learn one or two things given within that route that the other routes don't share. Addiction is also more outlandish with its story, having more violence, abuse, and morbidness than the first one did, all while lending well to the themes of the story and how routes go. Asuka as a main character is far more interesting, aggressive, and dynamic compared to the likes of Kaori. While I do think the main protag is a better fit compared to the previous game, the capture targets are slightly less interesting and lesser amount comparatively. While Syndrome supports 6 capture targets and a more robust common route and story, Addiction feels like it's missing some content and only has 4 lovers to choose from. Thankfully, both games all have unique capture targets and there doesn't feel like there's much overlap, as well as Addiction supporting a stronger ensemble. Now being Asuka's sister gives the story a more taboo vibe, but oddly enough doesn't play it out to the point that it's off-putting or make a point that they're not sisters, as the game reinforces this notion throughout. Sayaka is the princess type that has a bit more mystery to her than it seems, and certainly feels like the one you are led to more throughout the game as the common route supports it. But it honestly doesn't feel like it's the real canon ending. Itsuki is the cool type that messes with Asuka the most, but hides so much of herself and what she is doing that she often feels more like a mystery than a person. And lastly, Kaede is a part of the teacher-student lovers pair, and is surprisingly more aggressive and wholesome compared to the rest of the routes. For the most part, Addiction can feel more like a mystery than a love story, much like Syndrome felt more like a drama. But through its cast of characters and common route, it provides for a very enjoyable experience with a few shocking endings. Number 4. Nurse Love Syndrome. This was my first real dating sim visual novel, and honestly, if they are all this well done, I had to really give this genre a look. The common route of Nurse Love Syndrome actually doesn't deal with much love to begin with. The majority of the problems, concerns, and moments are just a newbie learning to be a nurse and figuring out how to be the best they could be. At a certain point, you start to unlock romantic routes, but this doesn't happen until like roughly 60% through the common route, and the game also has a bit of mystery and dark tones to it, with a large portion of it dedicated to the main protagonist, Kaori, traumatized from surviving a car accident. The game's choices are also a bit subtle, but not to the point of being obtuse. A lot of the choices usually align with where you want your affection to go, but it isn't always a clear 100% of the time. The main cast are all fairly given a variety of depth and care throughout the game, and even more so in their respective routes. With a section of 2 characters, I would say every character is well written well enough and have a number of layers on them that can help you connect to why they would do certain actions over constant explanation. A lot of this has to do with the common route explaining certain details about a problem, and how each character interacts with Kaori as she learns about the job. While the game usually has an odd moment where Kaori kinda sits down and wonders if she's in love, a lot of this is subdued by the fact that she is also a rather dumb protag. Kaori, by all means, tries her best, but it's clear to see that she is very naive and keeps her emotions on her shoulder. Due to this, a lot of interactions may seem aggravating and at times can be hard to place as a self-insert because she is largely her own character. Overall though, Nurse Love Syndrome was a great experience of love, romance, and surprisingly informative amount about what it's like to work as a nurse. While I certainly doubt there's any workplace romance going on in real life, my time with Nurse Love Syndrome certainly felt romantic enough to keep me busy. Number 3. Bloodstained, Ritual of the Night. Bloodstained is made in spite to show Konami that games like these are still beloved to this day, and honestly, we need more games made like this. Starting off with some mild exposition, Bloodstained is very much action first, story second. And in this way, it kind of starts off on a bad foot with some stilted writing and voice work, but largely it does it so we know everyone's motive and drive throughout the game. Each time you leave the home base and progress further, only to get stuck, often coming back will lend itself to pushing you in the right direction. Overall though, the majority of the game is better than most stories Castlevania ever came up with, but I feel this is due to simply feeling fresher in context. As mentioned before, the game does often lend itself to points where you feel stuck and don't know where to go. However, unlike previous Metroidvania games of the past, most of these points feel badly designed. Rarely does the game give you proper hints when you're really stuck, and at one point in particular is near the halfway point of the game, which requires you to acquire a special kind of armor. But nowhere in the game does it indicate where it is or even that you need it. Not to criticize too harshly, as after the initial obstacle of finding an area, it's simply on the player to explore it. Exploring Bloodstained is an absolute blast though, and the more and more movement options you gain throughout your journey makes both traveling and combat more engaging. While there are some more annoying enemies to deal with, none of them feel overwhelming, and often killing an enemy you see is the better option compared to simply ignoring it. The same idea goes with the bosses too, as a lot of them follow patterns in different environments that make each encounter all the more memorable and challenging throughout your journey. Honestly, Bloodstained is the best Metroidvania game when you're not stuck, and a large part of that is due to how good and varied combat feels thanks to weapons and shards alike. Really, Bloodstained has a ton of neat stuff to add to the Metroidvania formula, and a lot of that I feel is due to having more creative freedom. Aside from some minor hiccups throughout the game and taking into account that you don't try to 100% it, Bloodstained is an absolute classic to play through. There's still plenty to fix in terms of story, item collecting, and hinting, but a lot of it comes down to grumbles and groans over outright frustration against the player. Bloodstained is a solidified hit, and one I'm happy to have backed, and something I'm a little upset at myself for not playing sooner. Number 2, Yakuza, Like a Dragon. Aside from the last 25% of the game, Yakuza Like a Dragon is amazing. Through my time playing the 7th entry in the Yakuza series, I was always excited to see what new trouble or development that Ichiban and his gang were dealing with and how he brought everyone together. This game is truly an amazing soft reboot of the series, and while there are plenty of references to the original games, this really feels like a step forward in the right direction. Seriously, the majority of Yakuza 7 is wonderful! The last part of the game can feel a bit of a drag with how everything is set up. Not only so much the finale, but how you get to it. Largely the difficulty spikes have to do with grinding more levels and dealing with, if Kasuga dies, then it's game over mechanic. Yakuza 7 is still a stellar game though, and one that makes great use of RPG elements, narrative, characters, and Yakuza staples. Honestly, it was a bit worrying when I heard that Yakuza 7 was going to be an RPG. Having Ichiban have a whole crew was a great change of pace, and one that helps make the story better due to higher emotional ties. The cast for Yakuza 7 isn't only more diverse, but interesting to boot. I would have seriously loved to see more sub-stories starring the rest of the cast, but Ichiban is still plenty entertaining. Speaking of, Ichiban Kasuga really is the meat of this whole game, and while I do miss Kiryu-chan, Ichiban fits into his own niche of himbo that feels similar, but drastically different in his own way. Ichiban isn't exactly the smartest person in the world, but his emotional intelligence and ability to inspire others is Chad-worthy. On top of that, the game highlights the fact that Ichiban grew up on a soap land, and sex workers were a big part of his life. So much so that this game generally shows sex workers as human beings that may not be able to do more than just that. While it certainly isn't the full message we want, Yakuza continues to prove just how progressive it is. Overall, Yakuza Like a Dragon is a new start to an already wonderful franchise, and with the way they pivoted into RPG battles and mechanics is amazing. If this was just another brawler, I don't think this game would have made me as emotional as it did, and because of how well crafted the story and character interactions were, nearly all the emotional beats hit exactly where they're supposed to. Honestly, if you ever wanted to get into the series, this is a worthwhile place to start, and one that truly shows risk can pay off in ways you never expected. Honorable mentions! Gurumin, an ambitious title that feels like a mixture of 3D Sonic-styled platforming and Mega Man-like aesthetics. Adventures of Lolo, a simple-to-understand puzzle dynamic in a charming NES-style room clearer. Murder by Numbers, an interesting concept of murder mystery meets Pictocross, and frankly, if that gets your attention, you know you should play it. Kirby Super Clash, a fun freemium game you could beat with $5 and dress Kirby in cute clothes to beat up bosses. Pac-Man 256, an inventive, endless runner that helps keep Pac-Man fresh and highly addictive. Number 1, RollerCoaster Tycoon. I can't really think of a game that represents gaming in the 2000s on PC like RollerCoaster Tycoon. What is effectively a sim game about creating your own theme park with a bunch of scenarios, rides, and ways to kill people. The game is by no means pushing graphics or making you think really hard on what to do. It just gives you a plot of land to go ahead and make a park out of. You could even name it, which is a serious mistake to give teenagers the power to do so. Welcome to Poop Land! Seriously, the major fun of this game is just creating a park on your own while also managing a park budget and getting more guests in your park. Figuring out proper spacing, how to make pathways to fit the current layout of the park, and fulfilling guest demands, even if they are unreasonable. Of course, if you're a little too immature for that kind of micromanaging, and just want to build a death coaster, that's fine too. Honestly, I think the majority of people's memories with this game were simply building a bunch of death coasters and drown a bunch of people when they were bored. But really, that's all the game has to really be a good time. Just making fun times happen, even if some people gotta die to do it. RollerCoaster Tycoon also has like 21 different scenarios in its base game, 30 each for both expansions, and if you have them all, that's like roughly 81 different scenarios to go through.
Wow.
Each scenario could take up to like roughly 3 hours to beat, but likely be beaten half the time with the other hour, so just managing it to stay on track. I like to say that all these scenarios are a good thing, but for what the base game offers, it's repetitive as all hell. Get the park rating up, clear the budget, get the spinning guests, get the park rate up, get the park rate up. Cannot go there. What is the spinning guest? Get the park rate up here. It's blatantly the same thing again and again, and it's probably the only real problem with this game. And I'm saying this fully aware how much praise I'm giving it by putting it in the #1 spot. RollerCoaster Tycoon is just simply not a game you go fully in unless you're extremely obsessed with it or you're pacing yourself well. And if the only real problem with this game is that it doesn't give more motivation beyond making a park, then I'm pretty sure it fulfilled itself in what it wanted to do. I doubt many of you will unlock all the maps in RollerCoaster Tycoon. I doubt many have played through all the expansions, but I bet all of you have some sort of fun memory while playing this game. And when I think about all the death coasters, funny nicknames, and cool ways to make roller coasters, I just think about how awesome this game actually is. And if the game's main flaw is giving too much game, I think I'm fine saying it's my #1 game for 2021. Well, that's that. My top 10 games I played and beaten in 2021. I really hope to make next year full of amazing games that I've been putting off playing for so long. I certainly feel like I have a lot of ground to cover, and I'm honestly getting kinda hyped at some of the new games I'll be playing. Till then though, everyone, thank you for watching. Leave a like for moral support, a sub if you have a sandwich, and as always, sayonara, bye bye.